There's been some confusion over the last few days about iPhone XS, iPhone XS Max, and iPhone XR specs. Part of that is Apple's fault because, unlike screen density and storage capacity, they don't list RAM and battery capacity. And part of it is the fault of the broken internet, which, like the broken telephone, passes along information often without context or clarity, resulting in it getting warped and distorted in a way that's significantly less than helpful. I'm Rene Ritchie. Welcome back to Vector. It's great to talk with you again. Let's get into it. I've covered the difference between Apple and Android processors, systems on a chip, or SoCs before. Too long didn't read, Apple has the advantage of serving only one customer, Apple, and using only one processor, Apple's. Qualcomm has to make chips that see to the need of a wide range of vendors, and Samsung typically bifurcates its chips between its own Exynos and Qualcomm's. What does that have to do with RAM? The SoC includes the RAM. It's like a RAM sandwich. It has to feed the needs of all the software running on it. But like many things in silicon, it's not about quantity, it's about efficiency. Because iOS is native code and not interpreted. Because it doesn't have to worry about garbage collection. It had a brief flirtation with it, but it switched to automatic reference counting. It simply doesn't consume as many resources. Now, there's always a case to be made for more RAM. Every time I switch apps only to come back and have Instagram or my Safari tabs reload, I very much want to argue that very case. But RAM also comes at a cost. It and the processes that run on it consume power, which lowers battery life. There's a lot apps can do to lower their memory footprint as well, especially under iOS 12, where Apple spent a year having the frameworks engineers optimize the crap out of pretty much everything, and for that very reason. So yeah, it would be nice if Apple included 4 gigabytes of RAM for iPhone XS and iPhone XS Max, or 3 gigabytes in the case of iPhone XR, which doesn't have to worry about buffering anywhere nearly as many pixels on screen, in the keynote, on the tech specs page, and on the box. But then they'd have to explain why it's a lower number than some Android phones have on their tech spec pages and on their boxes. And while people seem to understand that just because a Ferrari has fewer tires than a Mack truck, it can still go faster and handle better because it's not hauling a trailer behind it, processor performance isn't anywhere nearly as mainstream. But that might be why it needs even more explaining. Power, surprise, surprise, is also all about efficiency. Look no further than one of my favorite accessories of the past few years, the iPhone Smart battery case. It launched in December without the benefit of a Phil Schiller keynote pitch and without much of any kind of context from Apple. That led to busy reviewers looking at it, doing a quick back-of-the-napkin price-to-capacity comparison, saying, "Oh my god, that hump," as many times as they could, and then dismissing it as ugly and expensive. Now, it was obviously, unmistakably both those things, but it was also the best damn battery case you could buy. And most people missed it because they were looking at capacity and not efficiency. Because the hump got the battery mass away from the antennas. It didn't block any signal. In fact, it was designed to boost signal. That meant, unlike all previous cases in the market, the radios in the iPhone didn't have to ramp up, costing significantly more power just when you were trying to save it. Because it also kept iOS in mobile mode instead of plugged-in mode, it also prevented expensive networking tasks from triggering, which also typically burned power in other cases just when you wanted to save it. So you had a lot of people reviewing it very badly who then ended up spending the rest of the year using it. With iPhone XS, it's different, but similar. You have a slightly smaller battery than the previous iPhone X, but you have a significantly smaller processor, the world's first 7 nanometer, as Apple made sure to tell us right up front. That saves power. You also have other efficiencies in everything from the controller to iOS 12 that result in the slightly smaller battery lasting slightly longer, about 30 minutes longer, according to Apple. But Apple doesn't list the milliamp hours for its batteries either, and maybe it should, but it likely wants to avoid having to asterisk it and footnote the entire context I just provided. I'd prefer if they did though, but I get that 90% of people don't know or care what that number means, nor should they. 2% probably really understand what it means within the complete architecture and power management system of the device, and I am certainly not one of them. And the other 8% of us just look at it, have no real clue what it means, but we just love to rush to get our articles and blog posts and videos live so we can yell about it in absolute yet valueless terms to the real benefit of almost nobody. Oh, and I do think Apple should be putting more battery in, not less. Apple still seems utterly convinced that weight is the primary factor for usability. That while people might like the idea of larger batteries in the abstract, what they really want to do is hold up their phones for increasingly long periods of time while they game, watch videos, even read. And the heavier the phone is, the more annoying it is to do that in bed, on planes, in lines, in waiting rooms, wherever. So Apple is all about keeping or slightly improving battery life while keeping or slightly reducing weight. And that's fine in a world where, Instagram, Facebook, Pokemon Go, and most streaming video apps were actually coded well and didn't just fire up your GPS, your screen, and your data and drain your battery as fast as possible. It's for that and for the oncoming age of 5G, augmented reality, and artificially intelligent everything that I think Apple should keep on holding the line, just make that line slightly higher. And yeah, put out a next generation smart battery case already. Damn it. iPhone XR, which comes out in October, has a significantly lower screen resolution and density than the iPhone XS and iPhone XS Max. That's depressed some people. It depresses me too, but maybe for different reasons. Let's go back to 2010 and iPhone 4, the first Retina display. There'd already been a whole lot of work done on high density and resolution independence by Apple and others, but what Apple did with iPhone 4 was incredibly straightforward and simple. They doubled the amount of pixels in every point. Instead of at 1x, it was now at 2x, and that was it. Sure, designers had to make at 2x assets, but that wasn't a huge hurdle. To understand the difference, imagine a point on a display. On the original iPhone up to the iPhone 3GS, that point was drawn with a single pixel. On iPhone 4 and later, that dot was drawn with 4 pixels. It didn't make a huge difference for dots or squares, of course, but for angles and curves, you could produce higher fidelity that was literally twice as good. So good that when you looked at it from typical viewing distances, the pixels disappeared and all you could see were clean angles and curves, fonts, and graphics. That's because Retina, or high DPI, is a function not just of resolution and size, but of distance. It's the same reason a 4K TV doesn't look much different than a 1080p TV of equal size if you're sitting more than 10 feet away. Increase the size or decrease the distance, and then you start to see the difference. Now, displays are expensive, not just in terms of the cost for the part itself, but the power it takes to light it up and to push its pixels around. Unless you need density for a specific use case, like VR headsets where the distance is so close, you need the resolution to be as high as technologically possible, 4K per eye. Please, more if you can. You're just wasting power with any pixels most people can't discern at a normal viewing distance. With iPhone 6 Plus, Apple went to at 3x internally. That meant that every point went from being a 2x2 pixel grid to being a 3x3 pixel grid. But Apple only went to 1080p for the display. So they used a scaler to take that internal at 3x image and squeeze it down into the external 1080p display. Some people, the ones who were particularly sensitive, could see the scaling and the flicker it caused for single pixel lines. For most, including me, it was fine. Now, for iPhone XS Max and iPhone XR, Apple is doing two very different things. For iPhone XS Max, Apple is letting at 3x be at 3x. The result is a 2688 by 1242 pixel resolution at 458 ppi. For iPhone XR, Apple is letting at 2x stay at 2x. That results in a 1792 by 828 pixel resolution at 326 ppi. iPhone XS Max is literally the iPhone XS Super Retina display with more pixels to fit a physically larger screen. And iPhone XR is literally the iPhone 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 regular Retina display with more pixels to fit a physically larger screen. So you don't get the density of the old Plus line, but you don't have to deal with the scaling either. Personally, I prefer the scaling, but I'm not the only person in the world, and I don't every time get what I want. Does this affect apps? No, not at all. Remember, points stay constant regardless of pixels, and app developers have all sorts of tools now, including size classes and auto layout, so at 2x versus at 3x is meaningless for any of that. Same with YouTube or their video apps. Yes, you won't get pixel perfect 1080p video on an iPhone XR the way you would on an iPhone Plus. Well, you wouldn't get it anyway because it's not 16:9 the way the Plus was, but pillar boxing notwithstanding, you will get either scaled up 720p or scaled down 1080p. Any video service could choose to send either to an iPhone XR. 1080p would simply use more bandwidth but give you better interpolation. And yeah, you'll have the same issue on the iPhone XS or the iPhone XS Max, just escalated. They're both bigger than 1080p, but not big enough enough for 4K, so you'll get upscaled 1080p video or maybe downscaled 4K. Will you notice the difference? Again, with the exception of VR headset use, not really, and those want 4K, probably closer to 8K per eye, and no phone display is anywhere near that. The far bigger deal with iPhone XR is that it doesn't support HDR, high dynamic range, because it's LCD and not OLED. Apple worked another engineering miracle, making an LCD display without bezels that could stand up next to the iPhone X and iPhone XS displays, and I've used all of them, and it really does stand up, but LCD simply can't do HDR. And it's high dynamic range, not high density, that really is the state of the art of video these days. But that, like the single camera system on the back, is one of the few sacrifices you have to make to get the less expensive iPhone this year. I get that a lot of people are really passionate about specs and that it's often emotional, not logical arguments that take over, because feelings, not facts, right? But all of these discussions benefit immensely from a little reason and a lot of logic. Now, I often get asked how to go about learning more about these kinds of subjects, because as much fun as videos are, sometimes you just want more. You want to get down and solve real problems. And that's where Brilliant comes in. Brilliant does an excellent job at this. It's a really cool website and also an app that helps you learn by getting used to solving interesting problems in science and, yes, logic. And each of the courses starts off kind of easy and fun and then gets more and more challenging as you master the concepts. And hey, if you want to learn specifically about technology, they've got whole courses built around topics like logic, algorithms, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. So check them out. Just go to brilliant.org/vector. Thank you so much, Brilliant. It's easy to grab a number off a disclosure, get your rage on, write a magazine article, knock out a blog post, or film a video. And if you say Apple fanboys might disagree, it's also easy to insulate and kind of insult yourself away from rational, logical, factual retort. Because anyone who disagrees with your hottest of hot takes just has to be a fanboy, right? Wrong. So allow me to retort. People interested in these products deserve information, absolutely. But they deserve and should demand that information in context. What it is easy. What it really means is hard, but hard is the job. And yeah, I absolutely, totally understand why some people get so concerned about this, especially people who are used to Android, where there are different vendors who compete largely based on specs, and when you never know from one generation to the next what needs to be supported, how much bloat there's going to be, or whether what's running today will even run tomorrow. But I think Apple's got a really good track record in this. iOS 12 goes all the way back to iPhone 5S, and I don't think there's any reason to believe what you're buying today won't still work tomorrow, the year after that. There's a lot of headroom already built in. At least that's what I think. Now, I'd love to know what you think. Do you care at all about the numbers and specs, or do you care about the experience and the real world results? Or both? Hit like, hit subscribe, and then hit up the comments and let me know. And thank you so much for watching.